Christopher DiCarlo is a philosopher of science and ethics whose interests in cognitive evolution have taken him into the natural and social sciences. His personal research focuses on how and why humans reason, think, and act the way they do. That's a tall order, if I ever heard one. Please welcome Christopher DiCarlo. Chris?
Good? Yes. How's everybody doing so far? Good. Are you ready to have some fun? Let's have some fun today, okay? We're going to talk about some of my latest research. I'm working on a new book, and it's called Flying Without a Pilot, a determined look at the future of ethics, law, and the value of human behavior. And in this book, I basically look at question 4 of what I call the big 5 in my pain in the ass book. And that's the question, how should I behave? And this is basically the question of ethics, right? What is ethics and what is morality and basic differences between them, but oftentimes they're referred to synonymously. So in this book, what I found is when I go to my local bookstore, and I have already talked to Dan Dennett about this, is that, you know, as egotistical as authors are in finding their own works, I noticed that I'm just 2 books away from the great Dan Dennett here, and all we're separated by is a deconstructionist, postmodernist, right there. So, close to greatness, right there. So, now, in terms of measuring the value of human behavior, we're dealing with value statements, things that refer to things like right and wrong, good and bad, fair and unfair, just and unjust. So overall, we measure value in basically positive and negative terms, right? That person never should have done that. That was wrong. Did you see what that person did? That was great. That was right. They were dead on. That was wonderful. So we use these terms. We use them a lot, and I'm very much interested in them for my research for this next book. So what I thought I'd do today is have a bit of fun with what philosophers call thought experiments. Now, the first thought experiment, many of you will already be familiar with, but I always like to get a feel of where my audience is at in terms of, how you think about morality and value terms like good and bad and right and wrong. And this is known as the trolley example, okay? Now, I'm going to want to get a show of hands, but here's the example. Let's say this is you down here, and this trolley, kind of like a streetcar, it's out of control, and it's heading down the track, and it's about to hit these 5 people right here. But you're right next to a flip switch, so you can flip, and it'll go off these tracks and just kill 1 person. Show of hands, how many people flick the switch? So quite a few of you, right? This is a thought experiment developed by Philippa Foot in England, and it's really interesting because now she says, okay, let's say the same situation is occurring, but now you're up here on this bridge. There's no way you can get down to this switch, but you can save all 6 people if you just shove the guy off the bridge onto the tracks, and that will stop the train. How many people are throwing the guy off? There's still a few. Interesting. But you notice how many, what the difference is, how large the difference is. I'll flick a switch, right? I'll flick a switch, kill 1 guy and save 5. But I won't save all of them by killing 1 because I'm physically involved with that. And that brings me kind of into it. Is there anybody here who wouldn't pull the switch at all? Yeah, so there are some people. And you have your reasons for that, right? I don't know, there's something about it, you can't do it. Well, it was going to happen if I wasn't there anyhow, so, right? So what we're doing is we're calculating value here. And it's telling us an awful lot about ourselves, how we calculate value. It's better that 1 person dies than 5. So we're making measure, we're attributing value to life. It's better to keep 5 people alive than have 5 people die, so I'm going to flick the switch. It's better to have 6 people live and 1 person die, so I'm going to push the guy off the bridge. Now, for this next experiment, thought experiment, I call it, what's your price? And I do this with students every semester. And basically it goes like this. For $1 million, would you do X? I'm going to define X. I'm going to step on an X right here. I'm going to define X as, for $1 million, how many of you would strip naked and walk to the variety store next to this hotel and buy me a pack of Mentos and come back? Well, hang on. So $1 million, how many people are doing it? $1 million. 500,000. 5,000. 250,000. $250,000. 10 grand. $10,000. I've gotten a kid all the way down to a box of Kraft dinner. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Here's where it gets really interesting. How many people would not do it regardless of the amount of money I offered? Right, and you have your reasons. I can point you out and I can ask you, but some people have their reasons. It happens in every one of my classes. Nope, there's no way, I don't care. And I could say, ma'am, $1 billion? You wouldn't do that? $10 billion. $1 trillion. Interesting, interesting. What's your price? Wow. But that's money, right? I'm talking about what I call moral upper limits, willing to do. What are you willing to, freely choose to do or not do for money? But there are other things, right? There's an old saying in philosophy, if you want to test somebody's beliefs, bet them. The vernacular for this, of course, money talks, bullshit walks, right? So we might have upper limits in respect to money. You're not doing it for $1 trillion, whereas somebody here maybe 50 bucks, 25. I've never actually gone through with this, but one of these times, I think if I'm not breaking any laws and it can't come back on me and I'm not spending the night in jail, why'd you do it? DiCarlo told me to do it. He's a moral philosopher. I had no choice. I had to do it, right? So we have upper limits in respect to money. But there are other ways in which to buy someone's actions, right? What about positions of political power? It could enable you to control various things in the world, right? Hi, Steve. So you could become a president or a prime minister, and your views could become realized, and you could enact all kinds of thoughts and turn them into laws and create the utopia you've always wanted. Would you be willing to sacrifice nudity for 5 minutes in order to become very politically powerful? Probably not? Okay. Moving on. Sex. Lots of people have sold themselves for sex, right? Lots of holy men have fallen, haven't they? Sure they have. So, people are willing to do all kinds of things for sexual reasons, but if you're not getting nude for sex isn't going to be appealing to you, right? No, of course not. Of course not. So I guess there's nothing that would make you do that. You're going to stand behind your principles, moral or otherwise. And then there's this. There's a scene in the first, I'm quasi-nerdy, but not entirely. There's a scene in the first Spider-Man movie in which the Green Goblin, believe it or not, grabs a trolley car and girlfriend, Mary Jane, and says, "You got to make a decision, Spider-Man." And he drops them both, right? You have people you love in your life? Anybody in particular? Your parents? Your sons? So what if a madman had your sons tied to a bomb and he said, "Unless you buy DiCarlo Mentos entirely," well, he's a madman, right? So, unless you do that, say goodbye to your sons. Would you do it? There you go. So we all have a price, generally speaking. Generally speaking, there have been some who have actually had said, "No, I don't care what you entice me with, I'm not doing it." And it's fascinating to think, really? Just for the sake of being naked for 5 minutes or whatever. So there are some holdouts, but generally speaking, we can be bought, right? Now, there are many ways in which we could be bought against our current moral values and beliefs, so we always should be, careful, right? There's that term, always and never. I would never do that. I would never do. I don't care how much you give me, whatnot. So then how do we measure value? This is what I'm finding quite interesting. What criteria do we choose in developing our moral measuring sticks for good and bad, right and wrong, fair and unfair? What counts, what doesn't count, and why? So, we find ourselves quickly becoming what's called meta-ethical. That is to say, we step back from ethics, right? And we ask questions about the very nature of what our convictions and judgments should stand for. How should we comprise and compose an ethical system? This is known as meta-ethics. So then what are the foundations, right, of criteria which we can accept as acting as the basis of measurement of positive and negative value? If we look at everything around us in terms of what I call relations of systems, then we can perceive value as being able to gravitate towards those actions which bring us the highest perceived positive value. You had to manipulate systems in order to get here. You had to go through various forms of transportation, monetary, political. You have a government. Steve Areno still lets you attend things like this, right? So you had to manipulate a number of systems in order to get here. But what is it that we value, or at least what do we value most? Do you think, and I'm really asking you, you can respond yes or no, do you guys think there is universal values? Yes, something that no matter where you go in the world, no matter who you talk to, we're going to find commonalities between different people around the world, right? Some things or actions that people generally agree upon. We know we value things, but we also value qualities. We value ideas as well. So before we discuss what fundamental things all humans value, let's see what we can consider in terms of the character of a moral agent. So what types of qualities do Homo sapiens tend to value most? So there are all kinds of things we value, and believe me, this is a very, very, very short, abridged list. We value, having enough food to eat, clean drinking water, sanitation, housing, clothing, security, liberty, employment, entertainment, the arts and humanities, and science. These are just a few things that we value. But clearly, we all value these things to some degree. We attribute positive value. And then there's qualities that people have. We look to them for things like honesty and accountability, friendship, trust, people who are hardworking, joy, self-reflection, diligence, fairness, right? And love. So there are many different qualities, many different things that all humans value. So I put together a quick little survey monkey thing. I'll get Bill to maybe put this up. If you want to take it, you're certainly welcome to do it. And basically, I just try to get you guys to rank the things that you tend to value most. What are the most important things and properties that you tend to value most? So if you have the time, please do the survey. So now we've been thinking about types of things that we value. Let's consider the notion of free will and choice and the decision we make. You decided not to do the Mentos challenge for a number of reasons, freely, or so it would seem, right? Let's think about this. Let's think very carefully about this notion of free will. How freely do we decide and act when attempting to attain the things that we value the most? How much are we in control of our views and our actions when we try to get towards those things, qualities, and properties that we all tend to value? The problem of free will. How much of it do you have, right? 3 schools of thought. Libertarians, not the political group, but the metaphysical group, believe that we have total freedom. I have no constraints. I can do anything I want. There's the hard determinists. No, every effect is by a contra-causal factor. So no matter what, everything you do was preceded by prior causes. And then David Hume kind of introduced this notion of soft determinism that, yes, I know gravity constrains me, that if I let this thing go, it will fall downwards. So I'm free to operate within the confines of hard determined rules. So those are basically the three schools of thought on free will. And you have to ask yourselves, where do I stand? Where do I think in terms of my freedom to take the Mentos challenge or not? There's this thing called the Sorites paradox. I talked about this last year. And Sorites just means heap. And the paradox, or the argument, kind of goes like this, right? If I wanted to build a heap of rice, but to do it with 1 grain of rice at a time, then it kind of goes like this. Well, 1 grain of rice doesn't make a heap. Well, if 1 doesn't make a heap, 2 grains of make, and I keep adding them, no matter how many grains of rice I add to it, I'm never going to get a heap, right? So 1,000,000 grains of rice isn't going to be a heap. Well, this, I don't find it to be much of a paradox, because we know when something isn't a heap, and we know when something is a heap. What I'm most interested in is the transitional period between when there isn't something to becoming something to being something. And I refer to here as X can be just about anything. When is a person tall or short? When is a man bald? How many hairs do you have to lose to be bald, right? When are we free, right? So any aspect of degree can use this kind of Sorites, I call it more of an analogy or a metaphor, and we can apply that to free will. We know when a heap exists and when it does not. This fuzzy area in between is what I call the umbra of becoming. Umbra being the shadowy area of becoming. When is someone in control of their actions, right? How many grains of rice? When are they not? Or should we say more control and less control? Or are we ever in control at all? So this is how we have to think about free will and human behavior, ethics and action, and how we value human behavior. So free will, 2 schools of thought. The dualists. Most people who are religious tend to believe tend to be dualists, that there are 2 things, your body and this other thing, this soul or this mind or this spirit. Dual meaning 2, you're made up of 2 things. And then there are the identity theorists who basically maintain that there's no pilot in the ship or ghost in the machine. There's just the ship, right? There's just the machine. There is no second element. So again, now you have to identify where do you stand when it comes to how philosophers over thousands of years have looked at this particular problem. So Canadian and American law assumes we can choose to abide by or break the laws. You know why I'm pulling you over? Yeah, I was speeding. So you know why. Yes. Why were you? Couldn't be helped. DiCarlo says I have no free will. By the way, I'm naked and I'm going to get Mentos. What are you going to do about that, copper? So we know that the law assumes that we can choose. Anybody here know who Vincent Lee is? What did he do? He decapitated Timothy McLean on a Greyhound bus and consumed part of him thinking he was the devil because God told him to do so. Mr. Lee today on the news has had his rights, his freedoms extended. He was not sent to prison. Mr. Lee was a schizophrenic, largely undiagnosed. So in terms of him choosing to abide by certain laws, principles, moral precepts, how much choice did he have, really? So then it makes us think, well, then how should we treat him, right? But the law does assume that we can choose, that we have free will. They hold us accountable as though we have these choices, but if there's no ghost in the shell, then in law, wherein lies guilt and innocence? And in morality, wherein lies good and evil? So I think where I'm going with this. Basically, I'm putting together a thought experiment in my next book, and I'm going to assume that hard determinism is true and that free will is an illusion. Then I say, what would have to follow in terms of ethics, the law, and the value of human behavior if we change the game a bit and now no longer assume that we have total freedom of choice or at least some constraints on choice? how would we have to change our laws and our views as to valuing human behavior and human actions? So in the book, I start off by saying, imagine you're flying at 30,000 feet. How many people flew here to get here? Lots of people. So let's say you're flying at 30,000 feet. The stewardess comes on and says, you can now take off your seatbelts and move about the cabin freely. We will be serving dinner in about an hour. Oh, and by the way, there's no pilot flying the plane. I hope some of you can appreciate who that is. It's there for your amusement. How would this make you feel? Right? For some of us, it'd be fine. Put the autopilot on. I trust computers, right? Computers, they're relatively trustworthy, aren't they? I'm sorry, I can't do that, Dave. Not all the time, right? Computers fail. And what I'm looking at in this next book are fears that humans have in terms of losing control. From a child's face who's lost and can't find their parents, to a person who's just been diagnosed with early onset dementia or Alzheimer's, we don't like the idea of being out of control. Some of us are more comfortable with it than others. Some of us take specific narcotics, allow us to lose certain levels of control. But for the most part, we like to have that sense of security that we're in control. The reason why I'm calling the book Flying Without a Pilot is because I'm referring to two types of pilots. That there's no pilot in the sky, right? This is just a graph indicating New Zealand and Australia's decline in Christian belief and the rise of non-religious people who have no religion. So that means if there's no pilot in the sky, we're on our own to make up the rules. If you've seen this movie or read this book, it has a specific reference to an ideology of which on this stage, 1 year ago today, Michael Horner accused me of being a moral nihilist. That's before I shaved my mustache off. And he was aghast of this notion of moral nihilism. Nihilism, Latin, meaning nothing. And I think that's what we are, essentially. We're moral nihilists. We create rules and guidelines for behavior based on value judgments of precepts that we come up with. We can see some of them maybe in nature, we can come up with some through culture, but irrespective, we are essentially alone in the universe, and therefore we are on our own to figure out how it is we're going to get along with each other and what we think the best ways of doing that are. And the second fear that there's no pilot in the skies is that there's no pilot in us. There's no ghost in the machine. There's just the machine. And a lot of people take issue with this. You know, well, are we just puppets then? Well, are we, controlled by these various kinds of constraints? And it bothers a lot of people. There's that fear of loss of control. So free will may be nothing more than an illusion of choice. Then I want to consider how value should be measured and what our responses and our developments of ideas should be. So there seems to be a need for a model which will better assist us in understanding the various complexities which influence causally how we behave. And that's why when we think about the types of constraints that act upon us, and there are not, I devised this notion, this idea of this OzTalk project, or the onion skin theory of knowledge, because there are an awful lot of constraints which affect and influence how we act, how we behave, right? And then once we figure out what these constraints are, maybe we can better designate accountability and responsibility. How responsible or accountable behavior was Vincent Lee. So, as I talked about last year, there's this concept I developed called the relations of natural systems, in which I look at humans here, all of us, as being a conglomerate of systems. Skeletal system, endocrine, neural system, immune, respiratory, circulatory. We're a conglomerate of systems. And we put those under the microscope and we break them down into their cellular level, what's inside the cells, the molecular level to the atomic level. And we smash the atoms and we see what those are made of. And we postulate things like string theory or quantum loop gravity. And then we understand ourselves going up in a larger scale into ecosystems. And all of these ecosystems are connected on this singular planet on which we inhabit. We need to think carefully about what are we doing on this planet, what are we doing to ours, and that this planet is simply one of 8 in a planetary system revolving around a singular star, which is one of millions in a system of stars known as a galaxy itself, one of millions in what would be called galaxy clusters, and then, of course, the notion of all space-time. So here, in a single glance, we can see how we relate to all the different natural systems that science has been able to talk about and examine, consider. And then we can think about how many different cultural systems there are. As I mentioned before, there was a transportation and political system that we had to abide by in various ways in order to get here. There's you again with all your various types of systems, and there's your family. Well, it's actually mine, and there's me. And then there are things like ethnicity, education, economics, politics, morality, agriculture, religion, business and industry, the law, medicine, even sports, transportation, communication, and the arts and humanities. Lots and lots and lots of different cultural systems that we have to relate to and that relate to us in very specific ways, in very causally specific ways. So what I did for this OzTalk project is I brought the relations of natural systems to cultural systems, and I call it the onion skin theory of knowledge, and the ways in which we can understand how these various systems work penetrates into this onion as a metaphor. The deeper into the onion we go, the more we know about physics, the more we know about chemistry, about ecology. But then we can understand that there's a breadth of knowledge that goes around the onion as well. And a lot of these systems overlap and interrelate. And then they relate the cultural systems through which communication is possible, transportation, agriculture, all of these other factors. So it's an extremely complex interplay of both natural and cultural systems. It is reductionist and it is materialist, and a lot of people take issue with that, people who tend to be spiritual or religious. What that does is it makes us and every other species on this planet system manipulating, navigate our way through these various systems by exploiting the constraints within this onion theory of knowledge in light of what we perceive to be valuable. You thought it was valuable to attend this conference. So you manipulated the systems that would get you here. And if you were successful, here you are. And if not, you're stuck in an airport somewhere, right? So what happens when you fly without a pilot and take seriously the idea of in a reductionist, materialistic, hard-to-determine world without free will? What changes in our experiences of the world? And what is the mindset or difference or the paradigm shift? What follows when we fly without pilots, right? Having neither gods nor souls to help us make decisions and judgments, but we must assess human behavior according to our own value systems within this incredibly complex interplay systems. What systems of ethics and law would then develop? In this type of reductionist, materialistic, hard-to-determine world without free will laws then govern our behavior? What types of revisions would codes of conduct and ethics need to endure? There are limits of free will. If we are like a robot, then maybe we can look better and more carefully at what causes the robot to function the way it does. People fear this. People don't want to be reduced to meat puppets and robots. It's fearful. They want to think that there's something more, that we're more in control. When our kids were growing up, there was an amazing movie called The Iron Giant. It's about an alien robot that basically comes to Earth and befriends a young boy named Hogarth. And towards the end of the movie, we find out that this robot will defend itself if it perceives a threat. And at the very end of the movie, it's aiming its gun at Hogarth. And Hogarth says, "You choose." And the robot seemingly makes a decision, as though it has a choice. But what does it now mean to choose, to freely think we have willful direction over our behavior, if we are like robots? Have the capacity of acknowledging our feedback looping causal networks so that we can become meta-aware of what our position is in life at any given moment in time. I think this is the true meaning, the true natural meaning of the term mindfulness. And that is knowing a great deal about the causal nature of your currents within a vast complexity of networking systems in any given nanosecond of your life. To have the capacity to step back from yourself and try to, as broadly as possible, see all of the systems within you and all of the systems acting on you at any given point in your life. To me, that is the true definition, the natural definition of being mindful of what's going on in your world. And in this respect, we gain maybe a little bit, because in understanding the feedback looping mechanisms, we are at least more aware of what's happening to us and how we are affecting other people and other plants and animals on this planet in a more broadened way. So maybe in just that capacity, we now have the ability to recognize what we are in any given point in time. It's what I refer to as your systemic identity, knowing how you fit in with all of the various systems that are acting upon you at any given time. This raises the bar somewhat in terms of our concept of freedom, right? We can acknowledge that we're going to be making a choice in and amongst options, so we are meta-aware. I can have the egg salad, I can have the ham and Swiss, I can have the vegetarian. What should I choose? And then we can become aware of what our choices are. Then we have to meta realize that we're still acting under the constraints of a hard-determined universe, so that our choices still are constrained. Oh, I think I'll choose the vegetarian. Why? Why are you a vegetarian? What has happened in your life to make you choose to become vegetarian? Oh, I'll choose the ham and Swiss. Why are you still an omnivore? Why do you still like the taste of meat? What in your life has led you to that? What are the various systems? What it does is it broadens our understanding of apparent choice. But nonetheless, we're still entrenched within the illusion of free will, even though we can make the very acknowledgement and act in accordance with our understanding of it. I know I'm a robot. I know I'm acting in this particular way. But I know better why I am. So this changes the way in which we have to view healthcare, law, justice, crimes, human sexuality. It's a game changer because we need to look at these types of human behaviors differently, almost as if we're viewing them through a new set of lenses, through a reductionist, materialistic, hard-determined world without free will. Values in this world will become generated out of whatever we perceive to be what I call optimally functional to an organism within a given niche. And then we have to measure the success of that organism by potential optimal functionalities and then measuring the distance between those to have a better understanding of what it means to value human behavior. Vincent Lee acted in ways in which we fear. Why? Because we value living. We value human life. That doesn't mean we let him do whatever he wants whenever he wants. It means we're going to have to see his actions differently and then try to fix the machine if we can. How do we fix the machine? That's what science is for, right? To help us try to figure out what makes us tick and how the machine can be fixed. Is this type of understanding undesirable? For a lot of people, it will be. Is this fate so horrible? I invite anybody, because I'm taking upon myself the thought experiment that hard determinism is true and an illusion. Therefore, what must follow in terms of how we value human behavior. I invite anybody to try as best they can to prove it wrong, to prove the thought experiment hypothesis wrong, to show that we do have free will. And then how do we have free will? If not, if we're not capable of doing this, understanding that we're a part of this amazing, immense, complex array of causal forces and constraints becomes fascinating because we're swimming in this sea of causal forces. We're floating and gesticulating, gyrating, undulating agents of topsy-turvy flows and eddies and ebbs. And we know we're involved in this type of causal flow. It does not mean that we do not love any less, appreciate art any less, or care any less. It has not reduced our ability to enjoy or appreciate the world in any recognizable degree. These experiences move us deeply, and within such a deterministic universe, we can better understand why they do so. Due to the system manipulating navigator's ability to exploit the constraints under which we are influenced, we need to understand better what is going on in our abilities to do so and in our marveling delight at how we manage to do this. So it increases our capacity for appreciation of who and what we are. When you fly without pilots, it changes nothing and it changes everything. It changes nothing insofar as the gods were never there in the first place. There was never a Thor, Zeus, Quetzalcoatl, Ra, Zoroaster, Allah, Yahweh. There's no Messiah. And there was never a soul in our bodies. So in this respect, you're still the same person, having the same experiences as you were when you thought there was a moral pilot in you and a divine pilot in the sky. So for those who are spiritual or religious, perhaps this can be offered as some kind of alleviation to their fear, because believe me, it is a great fear amongst many who want that sense of delusional control. And it changes everything, because we are now on our own to decide for ourselves what is best not only for us, but for other species. So we're faced with the difficult task of attempting to determine whether or not there are any universal values throughout the world. If we take the idea of hard determined seriously, what must naturally follow? If we are under the influence of contra-causal activity, then all agency is simply the product of prior constraints, the effects of which are beyond anyone's control. It follows that we're going to need a new type of ethics and law to deal with this type of realization. Value becomes optimal functionality of an organism. According to hard determinism, what does it mean to ask, what is it to lead a good life or to live a good life? The ancient philosophers talked about eudaimonia, the notion of happiness, la dolce vita, contentment. What now do we value when we realize we're in this contra-causal universe made up of a complex array of systems? If we live in a hard-determined world, how do we judge actions within this vast array of networking systems? As manipulating navigators, we attempt to behave in ways conducive to attaining ends that we attribute positive value and avoiding others that have low negative value. We don't appreciate people murdering and killing others. We don't appreciate rape. We put low negative values onto these things. Okay, how are we to get to those types of things that we value the most? What are the constants that are predominantly or unanimously considered positive and negative? And how do we determine these? Do we take a survey or a poll wide and attempt to establish universals? And then do we say, okay, according to this current period of time, the inhabitants of this planet, Homo sapiens, maintain that these particular values rank the highest? And then do we develop a standard or a system of universalized ethical conduct that will create a spectrum of ethical values from negative to positive? And this defines what I call a universal value matrix from which we can measure compliance to or deviation from these values matrix. then we can literally assign values to those gradations which either approach or deviate from positive and negative values and acceptable behavior according to what we've defined as perceived optimal functionality. It sounds very techy and scientific, but I think this is the inevitability. This is where we're heading when it comes to ethics. If we want to quantify the value of human behavior, it's going to look something like this. The universal value matrix will be open for revision due to changes in universal values. Maybe in 100 years, the values switch a little for whatever reasons. We'll then need a meta-ethical consideration regarding this universal value system to assure that context of different countries and places around the world are factored into the assessment. The value spectrum, use whatever gradations seem to be the most pragmatic, negative 100 to positive 100, whatever actions are carried out, we can measure them against this kind of universal value matrix. So we have something with teeth, we have something tangible, or at least we're trying to. Local considerations, context variables, these will all have to be factored in. But the universal value matrix can act as a primary guide. It doesn't have to be the defining, definitive, decision, but it can help to measure a particular agent's actions against the spectrum of values that have been universalized as a tool to assist us in our consideration of how we wish to value human behavior and action. So in learning to fly without pilots, the concepts of blame and praise will take on entirely new meanings. We'll be able to understand a much wider set of constraints through which individuals behave and act. We can marvel and appreciate that a person can accomplish various acts under given constraints, from dribbling a ball down a court and placing it through a hoop to moving a frozen piece of rubber past a heavily padded goal to the heart-wrenching notes of a tenor singing a particular aria. We can understand this better. We must establish common or universal values and a matrix in which to measure human behavior within these vast complexities of interconnected relations of networks. This is not going to be an easy task, and it's not going to be cheap. So I need to see some millionaires and philanthropists at the break. It's not fund itself. It will approximate fairness. What is it to fairly judge Vincent Lee's behavior? We abhor his actions. We abhor the effects. He took the life of an innocent man, and in our worldview, in our universal value matrix, he had no right to do that. Okay, so we recognize it as having extreme negative value. Now what do we do about it? How do we help the victims? Help the perpetrator. Because we're all human. We're all in this together. And Vincent Lee was somebody's son, or somebody's brother, or somebody's father. So if we're going to be compassionate to humanity, as well as other species, we have to have the fairest model in which to understand the constraints under which we behave in particular ways. Last year, I talked about the project. Thanks to a number of you here and your generous donations, it has now gone online at theoztalkproject.com. So, any of you can go to it. You can see what it's about. This is how I am trying to generate this program into pragmatic and practical action. So we must honestly consider and establish common global values as they relate to this complexity of this onion skin theory of knowledge. We should apply common global values to matters like global sustainability, environmental issues, health, law, human rights, animal rights, etc., and have this reflected in the responsible or more responsible management of human and natural resources. And I think in this way the OzTalk can be helpful in attaining this goal by widening our understanding of these causal relationships between systems. And I'm in discussion with people in Ottawa about this, so it can hopefully be used as a tool to help the Senate and actually make the Senate worthwhile. So, this research book, more than likely, it's for us, but on a large scale, it's for future generations. I don't think we're anywhere near here, right? Because who wants to robots? Who wants to think that we are influenced in so many ways and constrained by so many different systems? That fear is going to be there for a long time. It's not going to be easily accepted nor put into action, probably for generations. But I do believe, in all honesty, this is where we are headed as a species in determining the value of human behavior. Most of the Earth's populations are not ready to give up the ghost of dualism, comforted high they get with their delusions of deities and illusions of free will. So what is the burning question I'll leave you with is, in the interest of fairness, at this point in time, could our politicians agree to the development of such a model as the onion skin theory of knowledge? A model which is designed from the start to reduce agenda-driven manipulation in an attempt to increase fairness. Let's wait and see. In the meantime, think about what you currently value as you navigate your way through life's onion-layered network of systems. Thank you. Do we have time?
We probably got time for a couple questions. Sure, if there are any. Hey, just now I see who's coming up to the mic. I just want to point something out here.
Bring it, Dan.
No, I really do. It's serious because our last speaker, Richard Carrier, one of our other speakers, Louise, had a disagreement with him, an academic, scientific disagreement, and I don't think we were very nice about it, and I think we have to, that's science. Mm-hmm. That's how things get better, is when you see that kind of an argument. So let's not boo Dan.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Chris, almost everything you say, I could tweak just a little bit and agree with. I just don't think it's as revolutionary as you do. First of all, I don't see why you call it the illusion of free will. Mm-hmm. And in fact, in the last third of your talk, you in effect presupposed that we have free will and control, and that you talked about what we ought to do, and we should do this and that. And of course, you're appealing to us as rational beings to take your reasons on board. Mm-hmm. That's right, and that's a good thing you can do it, because we are not like that schizophrenic. Normal people who do not have broken machines between their ears, but well-functioning cognitive, they are moved by reasons. And that's what free will was always all about. You don't need a ghost of mind stuff. You don't need dualism for free will. What you need is the capacity to be moved by reasons, the capacity to be a rational agent. One of your systems on the system level is being an intentional system. Mm-hmm. And once we understand that role, we don't have to change ethics very much. All we have to do is discard a few misbegotten myths about how it might depend on a deity, or it might depend on an immortal, immaterial soul. Once you throw those out, good riddance to them. I'm entirely on your team. What do we end up with? We end up with deterministic or indeterministic. It makes no difference. We're materialistic. You want creationistic. Okay, I'm with you on that. Mm-hmm. But it's just not a big difference. The understanding that we can achieve by mutual persuasion of a large group, that's your universal value matrix. Mm-hmm. That's ethics. That's what we've been doing for a long time. So I just don't think you've got a revolutionary message.
With what you're saying, though, is that we can choose, provided that the machinery is functioning in a particular way. And in order to measure that the machinery is working in a particular way, we are relying on deterministic laws and constraints of which mostly are beyond our control. Well, I can't control if there's a tumor growing in my brain right now that's going to make me behave quite differently in the next week or year or however long. But my actions will be the product of those contra-causal elements.
First of all, I think you're misusing the word contra-causal, but never mind. Of course, every decision I make is caused by the state of my brain at that time, which is caused by the state of my brain at the moment before, and cause,
right.
Back and forth. We don't need any quantum indeterminacy in there
to
give us free will.
Okay.
And Well, you just said, okay, well, there we are.
Because I don't
is,
see there being any free will.
well, I would,
Right?
I,
At least that's the thought experiment I follow through with, what the logical following would have to be.
well, okay.
So do you call our actions free? Like, is it just a matter of semantics between you and me, or?
Well, you know, it might be. And after all these years of insisting that the concept of free will has a sort of dual anchorage in the manifest image.
Right.
If everything, it only has the one where it's incompatible with determinism, maybe that's a foregone conclusion, although I'm not inclined to believe it. But the main thing is, the other sense of free will is moral competence. It's the competence that we have to make a promise, to sign a contract. We have that. Physics doesn't say we don't have that. Neuroscience doesn't show we don't have that. That's the kind of free will that's worth wanting. We got it unless we're senile or a small child or brain damaged in some way. This elision from telling cases about people with damaged brains and then generalizing to everybody's brains, well, no, most brains aren't damaged.
No, but every brain is the result of prior contra-causal.
No, what do you mean contra-causal?
That you can't act in a way against what preceded it. If you could, it would be contra-causal.
Oh.
So we cannot choose other than what all the constraints force us to do.
That's a tautology.
That is?
That's a tautology.
A tautology?
Yeah, we can't choose other than...
So is life. We're here because we're here.
Well, I think you are making something revolutionary out of something which is actually revolutionary at all.
On the other hand, I think I'm going where others have feared to go, and I'm actually calling a spade, and I'm saying, if this is the way the universe actually is, then we are going to have to change our views about value. You and I are philosophers. We can say, oh, sure, it's this, it's that. But for the rest of the population of the world, they don't know that this is going on or to understand it this way, right? So if it's revolutionary, it would only be to those who are not philosophically trained or who have thought about what would follow if we live in a hard deterministic, materialistic, reductionist world without free will. And that's what I'm trying to say. Then this would follow.
Just don't add that last bit about without free will. Because that has all the connotations that you yourself deny. Namely, oh, if I don't have free will, then I guess I can't validly sign a contract, I can't make a promise.
No. I'm telling you what I'm telling you right now because I can't help it.
Yeah.